welcome back to Rorate Caeli. Today we will be looking at a book that is now out of print. It is titled An Introduction to Western Rite Orthodoxy. This book is really a series of various essays that were published at the behest of the Antiochian Western Rite Vicariate in the early 90s. As this book is out of print, I will be reading through some of the essays in this book with my own commentary to preface and end the readings. The first essay is An Introduction to Western Rite Orthodoxy by Father Alexey Young. Father Alexey is now known as Hieroschema Monk Ambrose, but for our sake we will refer to him as Father Alexey, as that was his name when he composed this essay. I have the great joy of knowing a man who was a spiritual son of Father Alexey, and Father Alexey himself was a spiritual son of Saint Seraphim of Platina. My friend recounts to me that Father Alexey spoke to him about a miracle from Saint Seraphim Rose regarding his own Matushka. Father Alexey's Matushka had a malignant tumor on her neck, and Father Alexey had a dream where Saint Seraphim appeared and bestowed a kiss upon his Matushka's neck, and her neck was healed from the tumor. Father Alexey was also a profound missionary who was known to build parishes largely from nothing and see them blossom into thriving flowers of orthodoxy. My friend also recounts that Father Alexey had a conversation with the late Bishop Antun of blessed memory. Father Alexey asked why he and Metropolitan Philip Saliba of blessed memory were so against monasticism in the United States. Father Alexey recounted to my friend that Sayyidina told him that in the old country, Arab Christians and their families have lots of children, and it was customary for these families to give one child to the church, to the service of the church. So Bishop Antun and Metropolitan Philip grew up together in a monastery. Sayyidina said that they were treated so badly at the monastery that he and Metropolitan Philip never wanted anything to do with monasticism when they came to the United States. Metropolitan Philip, as my friend recounts, was a somewhat controversial figure, but did excellent missionary work in the United States and brought many people into the church. Specifically for our purposes, Metropolitan Philip was a towering figure for the defense of the Western Rite and its propagation throughout the United States. Additionally, Father Alexey recounted to my friend the story of how he met Father Seraphim. Father Seraphim was serving at the bookstore at the Rorate Cathedral in San Francisco. Father Alexey recounts that there was an old babushka who was a fool for Christ. She grabbed Father Alexey by the arm and drove him into the nave, pointing out the various saints of the icons and on the frescoes. Finally, she pointed up at the Pantocrator in the dome and said, "Do you know who that is? Bow down your head. Bow down your head." And then proceeded to try to force down Father Alexey's head. And when she was done, Father Seraphim made his way to him and said, with a smile, "You have just met a fool for Christ." And the last story I will recount about Father Alexey is a specific missionary endeavor that he and Blessed Nectari of Seattle of the Russian Church were doing with a community of old believers. Vladika Nectari told them, "You have ways of piety, which we need, but we have the Holy Spirit, which you need." My friend recounts that this was beautiful, and this is how we should approach the old calendarists and any other group who have a love of holy tradition and piety, but need to be fully united to the fullness of the Church. My friend recounts, "I really feel that a multi-ritual multi-typicon model for anyone wanting to be received under any canonical bishop would be so beneficial for the missionary activity in the United States, and it would give us all the opportunity to learn from each other. And this sentiment is exactly correct. And this is the same sentiment that Father Alexey shared as well, and it's the sentiment that Father Alexey lived in his own life. And now turning to the text. Chapter 1. An Introduction to Western Rite Orthodoxy by Father Alexey Young. The light of orthodoxy is not lit for a small circle of people. No, the Orthodox faith is Catholic. It is a commandment of its founder, go into all the world, Mark 16:15. It is our obligation, therefore, to share our spiritual treasure, our truth, our light, and our joy with those who do not have these gifts. Saint Tikhon, Patriarch of Moscow, in his farewell address to America, where he had served both as an archbishop and evangelizer. Western Rite Orthodoxy? Impossible. To be Orthodox, you must be Eastern or Byzantine Rite. This is a common reaction to the idea of Western Rite Orthodoxy. The assumption, generally based upon lack of information, is that Orthodoxy is always Byzantine, and that the Western Rite belongs to Roman Catholicism. I converted to Orthodox Christianity in 1970, and gratefully spent the next 18 years being formed in the Eastern Rite. To this day, I greatly venerate and respect the Eastern or Byzantine Rite. It gave me both an attitude of prayer and a holy mode of worship. It exposed me to the incredible world of Orthodox saints, holy fathers, and spiritual guides, without which my soul would have been far less religious content. It exposed me to the incredible world of Orthodox saints, holy fathers, and spiritual guides, without which my soul would have far less religious content. In the mid-1890s, I began to be especially interested in the larger question of missionary work in North America. I knew that there were many well-established ethnic parishes, Greek, Russian, Antiochian, Serbian, and I saw that some Western converts are able to adapt to the Eastern Rite after an initial adjustment. After all, I and my family had done so. But as a priest, I also encountered former Roman Catholics and Episcopalians who were clearly searching for Christ's true church, but were often bewildered and confused by what appeared as complexities in the Eastern Rite. And if the parish with which they came into contact also used very little English in the liturgy and emphasized old world foods and customs, it was even more difficult for them to make the leap into orthodoxy. I began to wonder what, if anything, could be done to bring orthodoxy closer to the mind and heritage of Western people. It wasn't until I heard about the Western Rite movement in the Antiochian Archdiocese that I began to see other possibilities. It was, for me, an astonishing discovery. Whence the Western Rite? It all began several years ago. One afternoon, Archpriest Paul Schneerle, the Vicar General of the Western Rite in the Antiochian Archdiocese, phoned from Brooklyn to invite me to examine the viability of Western Rite missionary work and orthodoxy. He sent me a good deal of material to read and study, for I wanted to prove to myself that there really could be such a thing as Western Rite Orthodoxy. I also did some independent research. Thus was launched a fascinating journey through time into a little-known and rarely discussed aspect of Orthodox liturgical history and development, the Orthodox Western Rite, which is only now coming into its own, demonstrating both its functionality and its rightful and fruitful place in the Church. Of course, the whole subject of worship itself is rooted in the universal and one Church of the first 1,000 years of Christianity. As Father David Abramstov wrote in his classical study, A Brief History of Western Orthodoxy, from the earliest beginnings of the Christian Church, there were divergences in the manner in which the Eucharist was celebrated in the various regional churches. Within these churches, with their mixed populations, differing historic development, local traditions, diverse racial temperaments, and the like, it was inevitable that a large number of varying types of Eucharistic prayers or anaphoras should emerge. The unity of the Church, of Christ, and the unity of the Eucharistic sacrifice did not require a uniformity in the celebration of that sacrifice. The liturgical liberty, the variations and local differences were not only tolerated, but were constantly being elaborated upon. What is more important, they manifested the Catholic nature of the Church. Unity in diversity. In the first Christian centuries, a family of Eastern rites evolved in the Middle East and in what later became Byzantium, Russia, and the countries of Eastern Europe. Similarly, a family of Western rites arose in Europe, Britain, and parts of North Africa. Although these Western rites apparently came originally from Antioch, they soon expressed the legitimate mindset and culture of Western Orthodox Christians. Both liturgical families developed under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit in the one undivided Church. Each family of rites fully recognized the other. Clergy can celebrate it when in each other's lands, as opportunities presented themselves. No one thought this odd or unusual, for the faith was exactly the same and was fully expressed in each rite. Thus, whether in the eastern or western parts of the Christian world, orthodoxy still meant both right worship and right belief. The ancient patristic dictum, unity in diversity, was a living part of the Church's witness. Today, as the movement towards reunion between the Orthodox and the so-called Monophysite churches such as the Copts progresses, the Church may soon absorb into her bosom still another family of rites, cut off from the living experience of the Church for more than 1,000 years, just as the Western Rite had been until recently. In my reading, I discovered that, at least from the 17th century on, the Eastern Orthodox patriarchs had a renewed awareness of the diversity of rites in Orthodoxy. Although the average Orthodox Christian today thinks of the contemporary Eastern Rite as fairly standardized, this is not, strictly speaking, true. There are legitimate and sometimes great variations between the so-called Greek and Russian styles of serving the liturgy. In addition, the Russian Church, both in Russia and abroad, has now restored the use of what is called the Old Rite, the unique liturgical style and text used in Russia for more than 500 years before the reforms of Patriarch Nikon of Moscow in the 17th century. The Old and the so-called New Rites now exist side by side and in harmony in the Russian Church. In addition, there are now many other variations in the Byzantine Rite, sometimes even within the same Orthodox jurisdictions. Modern efforts at establishing a Western Rite. In the mid-19th century, there were some new efforts to bring Western Christians into the Orthodox fold via the Western Rite. Alexey Young, the renowned Russian philosopher and theologian, and General Alexander Kiriev, a prominent Russian layman, were among those that inspired a critical yet appreciative study of Western rites among the Orthodox. In fact, in 1870, the Holy Synod of Moscow established a permanent commission to examine the rites of Western Christianity from ex-Roman Catholics and Anglicans or Episcopalians. In 1904, this commission was asked by Archbishop Tikhon Belivin of North America, the future Patriarch of Moscow, and now a canonized saint, a man of immense spiritual gifts and great missionary heart, to examine the American edition of the Book of Common Prayer, used by Episcopalians. After corrections to bring it into conformity with the Orthodox faith, the Holy Synod gave approval for its use. Because of his interest in the Western Rite missionary outreach, St. Tikhon is today known as the patron of the Western Rite, and the corrected Eucharistic liturgy from the Book of Common Prayer now bears the additional distinction of being called the Rite of St. Tikhon. Along a similar line, in the 1920s, former Roman Catholic parishes in Poland were received into the Russian Orthodox Church. They were permitted to use the Gregorian Western Rite, named for the 7th century Orthodox saint and bishop of Rome, Saint Gregory the Great, called the Dialogist on the Orthodox calendar. At this same time, Constantinople concurred in principle with the idea of restored Western Rite Orthodoxy. Then in the 1930s, Moscow Patriarchate accepted a Western Rite group in France, about 10 parishes, with the wise proviso that the clergy of the Western and Eastern rites be able to serve in both rites. This interparticipation in rites, Father Abramstov explains, is exactly what shows in concrete terms that individual clergy, as well as churches, are in communion with each other. Because of dangerous political developments for the Russian Church and the Soviet Union, these French Western Rite clergy came under the jurisdiction of Constantinople in 1953. By 1960, they had been received under the protection of a most remarkable man, Archbishop John Maximovich of the Russian Orthodox Church in exile. Well known to Orthodox Christians throughout the world and in every jurisdiction as a miracle worker and great ascetic, he is called Blessed John by his venerators today. His tomb is in the crypt of the Cathedral of Our Lady, Joy of All Who Sorrow, in San Francisco. Is an object of pilgrimage for thousands each year. He will soon be canonized. While Archbishop in Europe, John Maximovich was also the first Orthodox hierarch of modern times to restore to the consciousness of Orthodoxy the previously forgotten saints of the pre-schismatic West, such as St. Patrick, Enlightener of Ireland, St. Martin of Tours, and many others. For us in the Antiochian Archdiocese, however, another historic year was 1958, when after approval from Patriarch Alexander III of Antioch, Metropolitan Anthony Bashir of blessed memory issued an edict authorizing the use of the Western Rite in North America. He observed that he had met innumerable non-Orthodox Christians in the United States and Canada who were attracted by our Orthodox faith but could not find a congenial home in the liturgical world of Eastern Christendom. Thus began a new chapter in the history of the Western Rite movement, which today numbers in excess of 10,000 souls, according to Father Paul Schnirla. In addition, there are smaller groups of Western Rite groups under the Moscow Patriarchate in this country, in the Russian Church in exile, and under the Patriarch of Romania. Coming home to my Western heritage. Following a period of personal study and prayer, I was moved to ask for reception into the Western Rite Vicariate of the Antiochian Archdiocese in 1989. The missionary possibilities were, of course, self-evident. But for me, personally, this move also meant regaining the rich legacy of my own Western heritage, which, as much as Byzantium is for Greeks, was soul of my soul. When His Eminence Metropolitan Philip Saliba had received the former Evangelical Orthodox Church into the bosom of Eastern Rite Orthodoxy, he had warmly exclaimed, "Welcome home!" Now I, too, had come home to the orthodoxy of my own Western forefathers. I have been privileged to be a part of a movement into orthodoxy of two large and thriving Western parishes in Denver, Colorado. St. Augustine's, composed primarily of former Roman Catholics and Episcopalians, was received into the church by His Grace Bishop Antun in August of 1990. The following year, in October of 1991, St. Mark's, a century-old parish of the Episcopal Church, was also received by Bishop Antun. Because of the ongoing and deepening apostasy of the Anglican Episcopal Church, several more parishes around the country were received the following year, and more are on the way. Building a workable Western Orthodox witness in the large Orthodox community of Denver has required prayer and creative outreach to the 4 Eastern Rite parishes of other jurisdictions in our metropolitan area. We have built bridges and strong friendships to such an extent that all of the Eastern Rite clergy of Denver not only accept the Western Rite, but invite us to concelebrate with them and accept our invitations to concelebrate with us in the Western Rite. Much of the leadership for unity was provided by the late Bishop Callistos of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese here in Denver. By his own request, he twice presided over a solemn high mass at St. Augustine's before his sudden and untimely death. Truly, we have lived to see the ancient principle of unity in diversity restored in the Orthodox Church on this continent, as the Holy Spirit is moving to bring as many souls as possible into the ark of salvation, Christ's true church. That concludes Father Alexey's essay. In closing, I would like to offer the additional clarification that this piece was written in 1993, and some of the data and metrics that Father Alexey presented are reflective of that time, but do not hold true today. A few examples are, he mentions Blessed John of Shanghai and San Francisco. He has been since glorified as St. John the Wonder Worker. Additionally, he recounts that the number 10,000 were the amount of souls being nurtured in the Western Rite of Holy Orthodoxy, and I am pleased to clarify that by the labors of Father Alexey and many other holy priests, that number is far greater than 10,000. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you appreciate this video, and stay tuned as I will be examining 4 more essays in an introduction to Western Rite Orthodoxy. May God bless you, and may God keep you.